you're connecting to it, you
Yeah, but she doesn't know them like we know.
I don't know. It's not your right of way.
No, I mean the part that you as a part of it is connecting.
Yes, we would know we would need a right of way permit for that.
But the CBD one, I need to ask them. I don't know how they.
That's an issue you'll face now that we have all these CBD. That's the first time I've come across this, and we thought about it, and we said to our client, I don't know, this is a little bit a new animal for us. We're going to go do some research and figure out.
They may not. They may just take the position they're public roads and you can access them. I don't know. I mean, are you paying CBD assessments?
No, because interestingly enough, the parcel that I have, or I'm looking at, is created. It was included in an MPUD, but not included in the plat of the MPUD. So basically, the MPUD, the overall property was platted, and then this property was left out, but it's included in the MPUD. It's not included in the plat.
It's not included in the CDD either.
Correct.
Yeah. The reason I'm raising this with you is I don't know if the CDDs would take the position that to connect to the road you need to be paying part of the CDD maintenance assessments. I don't know the answer to that.
Interesting things.
Yes.
Gotcha. Learn something new every day.
That is unusual though.
Hey Denise, just let me know when you're ready.
Ready.
Normally a lot of times, well, so maybe no, because there are some commercial trucks that are left out in the city.
All right, all set.
I'm ready.
I'd like to call the meeting to order. We will stand for a moment of silence and a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, do we have the roll call, please?
Jimmy Girardi?
Here.
Christopher Bull?
Here.
John Moody?
Here.
Matthew Munz?
Here.
Derek Conklin?
Here.
Chris Williams?
Here.
Chairman Charles Gray?
Here. And the proof of publication?
The items were advertised in the Tampa Bay Times on April 17th, 2024, May 22nd, 2024, and June 26th, 2024, and by affidavit of certified mailings and site listings.
All right, thank you very much. Could we have the approval of the minutes, please?
Motion to approve the minutes from the May 16th and the June 6th meeting.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Okay. Moving to the instructions for the meeting for those of you who haven't been here or haven't been here in a while. But before we do that, anybody that plans to give testimony today, if you please stand, raise your right hand and be sworn.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth so help you God? Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So we are the Planning Commission, and we're appointed by the Board of County Commissioners, and we meet twice monthly. We serve as a local planning agency, and we hold public hearings and transmit to the Board of County Commissioners recommendations on comprehensive plan amendments, land development code amendments, rezonings, and conditional use requests. The Planning Commission is the final decision-making body for special exceptions, certain appeals, variance requests, and certain alternative standard requests. However, final decisions may be appealed to the Board of County Commissioners. If anyone is in opposition to any comprehensive plan amendment, land development code amendment, rezoning, conditional use, or any item where the planning commission makes a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, it's important to you to attend the appropriate Board of County Commissioner meeting. We have those dates available if you need them. Those of you not familiar with the format of the meetings, we have 3 sections: continuances, consent items, and regular items. We'll go through those, and it's been our policy to, if there's been a request from the applicant or the staff or continuance, it's been our custom to approve those requests unless there are extenuating circumstances. The consent items, I'll go through one at a time. As I go through there, if you have something on the consent agenda that you'd like to have discussed today, raise your hand. We'll pull it from the consent agenda and move it to the regular items. Otherwise, when we finish going through the consent agenda, we'll vote on them at one time and request for approval for those items. Then we have the regular items, and those items are not placed on consent, and they will be heard and vetted thoroughly here today. Applicants will be here, and they'll make their presentation, and anybody in the audience will have a chance to ask questions. So before we get started, is there anybody here to speak to anything that's not on today's agenda? Okay. And it's been a policy of the board to for anybody who wants to ask for additional time. I don't think we've had any requests for additional time, have we?
That is correct, Mr. Chair, but we do have Ms. Hazelwood who would like to speak in public comment.
Okay, yeah, I did see you. And so we don't have anybody that's requested that for extra time in writing, but typically the applicant gets 3 minutes to make their presentation, and the respondents have 3 minutes to ask any questions that might come up. Then the applicant could come back up and try to answer any of those questions that were raised. So before we go further, and because we do have one person here to speak on an item not on today's agenda, just say to you to please silence your phones, please, so they don't go off during the meeting. I better check my own. Yeah. And other than that, I think we're ready. Okay. Now I'm legal. Okay. So when you come up, if you please give your name and address. And I know you've been sworn, I saw you.
I'm just going to record my name and address and push a button. Nancy Hazelwood, 34110 A Nice Place. I wanted to say thank you to y'all for your thoughtfulness and the way you go over each item on the agenda. I know sometimes it takes a while, but that doesn't matter. The way you are thinking through each of these is really appreciated by your citizens, so thank you.
Thank you.
Also, last night there was a code enforcement meeting. That was one of the best presentations I had seen out of the county in a long time. Unfortunately, there were only 6 people there, and that part might need to be worked on a little bit. I would be glad to help if somebody on staff wants that. And I believe there's one more code enforcement meeting coming up if anybody wants to go to it. I think it's in Land O'Lakes. Also, sometimes we can use this as a time tonight to talk to y'all, but to talk to staff and tell them what we like and don't like. We don't really have that ability much either. So thank you again for what y'all do. I sincerely mean that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you coming. All right, we'll take all of the thank yous we can get. All right. Pardon me?
If you have general public comment, that would
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll bring you the microphone if you like.
Do you want us to bring you the microphone?
I have cancer. I don't have it, but it damaged, so sometimes I can't speak a word, but I know what it is, so don't think I know what it is. So, yeah, thanks.
Would you prefer to sit?
You can sit if you like.
You can sit if you'd like.
I think I'm okay.
Oh, okay, I'll take this back then.
Just sitting down. I can hold this, but
Yeah, there's a microphone right
There's a
up here.
microphone right there.
You can hold on to that podium. If you're feeling weak, we'll catch
hi,
you.
my name is Susan Shelton. I live at 40010 on River Road. I was born and raised here because in 1868, my great-great-great-grandpa Sumner came down there and bought a huge piece of land, and God has given me 8 acres of it. And that is what presents this, what's happened on the River Road that is so concerning to me and other people. There has been a person who's, and I can't remember names all the time, and know the man and everything. It's not going to come up, but you probably figure. He owns a pretty piece down there all these years. It was not animals. He had stuff on it all these lives, his grandpa and everything. And now he's wanting to sell it, or he has it and he's going to sell it, and he wants to put on that first piece. He is approximately up to 200 and 300 houses right on on River Road. And then also recently, he bought another one who is, this part is 24 acres that he can barely get catch to that. And then the word came back to me that they want 100 houses in there. That piece is my great-great-great-grandpa's house. And it is so hurting me. I mean, I know something's going to happen, but maybe we could delay them. We could make it into something. But all these houses, maybe, you know, I may not know a lot of things about that, but you could have houses maybe, but know what to do with. It's terrible. And I just think that
Go ahead, you're okay.
that God would be so unhappy to do that. And I went to sign, and I went up River Road. Every single, except for 3 people, signed it. 4 people was crying, and then the 4 people that wouldn't sign, their land touches that, so they're hoping that man will buy theirs so they won't sell that. So I didn't, but I did that. And the first thing that we had so many people there that they had to go get chairs that come. And another thing is, all week I've been working on this because they were told that I would be here one day this week. And this is the 3rd time that I had tried to be, that this is the place I'm supposed to be. But so I'm not sure this isn't going to have anything to do with it. So this probably isn't the only time. But at least you people know what's going and how it's hurting, and that maybe we could work together and bring it together in a God way and not have all those hundreds of houses and make it look better than that. So bless y'all, and thank you so much for helping me. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Yeah, for bringing that up. Is that home, how old is that home?
I'm sorry, what?
How old is that home?
My grandpa did this in 1868, Sumner. Robert,
Bobby Sumner, yeah.
that was his uncle,
Mm-hmm.
was my grandpa that did all that.
Okay, thank you. Now, just staff question, don't we have like, don't we have a, I'm sorry, I'm just asking them a question. Don't we have like a historic element in the county that might look into that for
We do.
preservation? Yes,
We do.
David, if you could come forward. David Engel.
Thank you, David Engel, Planning Director. I just want to alert you, we had a historic oversight committee at one time in the past. It was disbanded in about 2011. But we're working on now resurrecting that. We also have a historic planner capability on the planning team now. And we'd like to start working on creating a registry and also identifying historic home sites and mapping them out and preserving them wherever we can.
That's great.
That's some of the initiatives we're working on right now.
Okay, so is there someone particular or a part of the county that she should be keeping in touch with?
Well, I'm going to give her my mobile phone number and she can contact
Oh,
me.
wow, okay.
All right.
See, I don't even have that.
Unless you think you not just get this name. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I think we're next.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Planning Commission members, Denise Hernandez, Planning and Economic Growth Department. Today we're going to start with a walk-on continuance item. That item was provided to the Planning Commission members and also to the clerk's office. What happened on this one is that the applicant posted the property and also sent out notices prior to actually having a date assigned. So that's why we're doing this as a walk-on continuance. It is PEG 247597. It's a zoning amendment in the name of Caucalacus West MPUD, SR 52 Limited Partnership. And it is a rezoning from an AC agricultural district to an MPUD, Master Planned Unit Development District, to allow for the maximum development of 155 single-family detached units, 67 single-family attached dwelling units, 168,799 square feet of support commercial, and 125,000 square feet of corporate business park, target industry, light industry. And the recommendation is to continue this item to the August 8th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting at 1:30 p.m. in Dade City.
Okay, do we have anybody here? Is the applicant present? Anyone here to object?
Denise, I just have a question. So, given that the hearing today was not fully noticed, is the new date going to be fully noticed?
The new date will be fully noticed, yes.
So new newspaper
Yeah,
posting?
this never got put in the newspaper. It was just posted and notices were sent. So there will be new posting and notices will be sent, and of
New
course it will
letters,
go
everything.
in the paper, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and this is the only continuance?
Yes, it is. It's the
Okay.
only continuance item.
So do I have a motion?
I'll move continuance of PEG 24-7597 to August 8th, Dade City.
Second. Second. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
All right, moving on to item PC3, which is PEG 247798. It's a zoning amendment in the name of Kothapali Edmund Ripeth. It's for a change in zoning from an R1MH, single-family mobile home district, and PO1 professional office district to a C1 neighborhood commercial district with a deed restriction limiting the uses to those uses within the C1 district. Comes to you with a recommendation of approval.
Okay. Applicant present? Okay, anyone here to object? Okay.
Following item is item PC4, which is PEG 247803. It's a zoning amendment in the name of SA Development Partners, LLC, for a change in zoning from a C2 general commercial district and a C3 commercial light manufacturing district with a specific use to a C3 commercial light manufacturing district with a voluntarily agreed upon deed restriction that includes the voluntarily agreed upon restriction to limit those uses to those uses in the C3 district that are consistent with the ROR retail office residential. Also, because it's in the connected city innovation zone. There's also requirements within the deed restriction to stub out to the property to the west in order to have that mobility with bike, pedestrian, golf cart, low-speed vehicles, and automobile interconnectivity. Also a connection to the sidewalk that's located on the north portion of the parcel. And it comes to you with a recommendation of approval.
Denise, those deed restrictions address live local as well.
That's correct, yes, that's when I say limiting those uses to C3, that's the live local deed restriction.
That's what I figured.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, have we had a conflict on this one, so I won't be
Okay.
able to vote on it?
very good, so noted. Is the applicant present? Anyone here to object? See no one. All right, next.
Following item is item PC5, which is PEG 247808. It's a zoning amendment in the name of Dave Mitchell's Holding Company, Mitchell Clinton rezoning, for a change in zoning from an R1MH, single-family mobile home district, and C2 general commercial district to a C2 general commercial district with a deed restriction that addresses the Live Local Act. And also I do want to mention for housekeeping purposes that on this one, the deed restriction that was attached on the agenda to the civic clerk item had like strike through underline. We're going to clean it up and send it back to the clerk's office, so that will be the actual clean version that will be attached. And it comes to you with a recommendation of approval from the Planning and Economic Growth Department.
All right, applicant present?
The applicant is virtually present.
Okay, is anyone here to object? Okay, unless the applicant wishes to speak, let's keep moving.
All right, we're going to keep moving. PC6 is PEG 240353, and that is a development agreement in the name of Depew East MPUD, Master Planning and Development, Pulte Home Company LLC. This is for a development agreement to design, permit, and construct improvements to Watergrass Parkway and Wells Road in exchange for transportation development fee credits. The parcels are located generally on the south of Wells Road on approximately 931 acres within villages L and M of the villages of Pasadena Hills. On this item, you're sitting as the LPA, and we're asking for you to recommend approval of the proposed development agreement to the Board of County Commissioners.
All right. Do I hear any comment from the audience? Okay, do I hear any questions from the podium, dais? Nothing? Okay. Next.
That was the
That's
end
it?
of your consent.
Okay. So do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for the discussion. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
I can't vote on PC4
Maybe you
though.
should,
Do them separate.
Okay,
you
we'll
should
do
take
them
separate
separately,
action.
that's right. Was
So,
PC4.
I'll amend my motion to exclude PC4. So it's the consent items PC3, 5, and 6.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on 3, 5, and 6. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. And now we'll have a motion on PC4.
Motion to approve PC4 on the consent agenda?
Second.
Second, and we've noted that there's an exclusion on this one. One of the commissioners, Chris Poole,
Yes, sir.
and so he won't be voting on this one. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Okay.
Thank you. And Mr. Roberto Becerril will be presenting item PC7.
Okay, can we take a 5-minute break? Promised a few people that it might take a little longer on this one. So, okay, we're taking a 5-minute break.
It'll take 20 minutes just to read it in the record.
I'm going to stop him for reading that whole thing. I told him he doesn't need to.
Brad, I was referring to you, Brad.
I like now that you get a little hot or not hot.
Wow.
How are you? 22 scholars. Is that what I guess you're eating?
Doing well, how are you, sir? Good to see you, my friend.
How are you?
Rain went out last weekend. It looks like he got some, but I'm not sure where he went out.
Yeah, well, she wasn't out there long as the weather.
Okay, yeah.
She went out all the
Doing
time.
great. You're doing great.
Out by the camp.
Okay.
Right off the green.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it.
Be interesting to see how frequent, how much they have.
Well,
Yeah.
it took a lot of years for me to be efficient.
I think it was a real good year last year either, wasn't it?
No,
And this is the first year that they extended to the full.
it's taking a long time to come back. Fishermen drive. Stop.
Margaret and what?
They used to race.
Is that the same thing that Keith was talking about?
It was 10 years.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. All right.
Yeah, you want one? Oh, I'm going to do my.
You're famous.
See there? Infamous, that's a better word now.
We'll see.
Is everybody down?
Inspires conversation.
Okay, Brad, you can go sit down now. Look at that. Ooh. Back in order now, please. Thank you. Okay, Clark, you making this presentation? Clark?
I'm good.
Good afternoon, Chairman and board members. Roberto Becerril, Development Review Department. And I have to read the entire section, right?
I don't think you do for this.
No, at this stage, you don't have to read the entire section. You just do that for the first reading.
You just have to explain it.
Okay, all right. Do you guys want a full presentation or just want to hear what the changes were made?
Probably a full presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this is a continuing item from May 16 to today, July 11th, and the invasive vegetation removal is Land Development Amendment 69. So we have previously met with the interested departments and parties on March 28th and the Horizons Roundtable on April 17th. Then we also came to the this board on the 16th of May. And we also have one-on-one meetings with the Board County Commission members on May 28th and May 30th. And this amendment is consistent with the following comprehensive plan amendments. Next slide, please. Chapter 3, conservation element, which is the entire objective con 1.8, elimination of exotic nuisance plant species, and the Chapter 7, transportation element, policy TRA 3.4.4, elimination act and control of invasive plant species. The agenda on itself, it calls out that within Chapter 48, there's several changes, and these sections are amended to require that applications for this approval must include an invasive vegetation management plan and management for perpetuity. The management plan will not apply to individual single-family lots. Section 406.5 right-of-way use permit, particularly H 406.5 H.2 restoration and maintenance standards This requires that permittees remove all vegetation in the permit area and dispose of the vegetation using an appropriate method to prevent propagation. The chapter 400 types and application in chapter 500 zoning amended to require invasive vegetation management plan, management in perpetuity, as well as prohibition of invasive plants from being cultivated and distributed. Then the next slide is for chapter 600, we have an amended to make some corrections, internal citations. On chapter 800, natural cultural resources, it's amended to clarify that invasive species are to be removed from ecological corridors. On the next slide, we have several sections on chapter 900, development standards, particular transportation corridor management, section 901.2.f.2.b, interim uses, which is amended to require that maintenance must include an invasive vegetation management plan and management during the interim use. 901.3, access management. One particular section, 901.3, maintenance, which is amended to clarify that maintenance must include an invasive vegetation management plan and management in perpetuity. Next section, 901.4, substandard roadway analysis and mitigation. Section 901.4.e, submittal information. It's amended to require that applications for these approvals must include invasive vegetation management plan and management in perpetuity. Compliance with subsections shall be required if it is determined that roadway deficiencies are required to be corrected. Next slide, please. For chapter 900, continued, we have section 901.6.
Roberto, I'm sorry. Could you pull that microphone up a bit because you're not that loud?
All right.
I'd like to hear you a little bit better.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
901.6, street design and dedication requirements, section 901.6D, design and construction. Amended to require the applicant for these approvals must include an invasive vegetation management plan and management in perpetuity. And the next section is 901.6, and this is 901.6E.1, roadside design. Amended to require that all vegetation and sought place in the dedicated right-of-way be free, clear of invasive vegetation species. Then section 901.7, bicycle facilities, section 901.1.7.d, construction, and section 901.8, pedestrian facilities, amended to require that within the boundaries of the limit of construction of these facilities, an invasive vegetation management plan and management in perpetuity is also required. And last but not least, we're adding a new definition, invasive vegetation or invasive plant species. It's a new definition for invasive vegetation or invasive plant species as proposed. We asked for finding, the board finding this proposal ordinance amendment consistent with the Pasco County Comprehensive Plan and recommend approval to the Board of County Commission. And the next hearing will be the BCC first reading on August 6th at 1 p.m. in Dade City, and then the adoption hearing on August 21st at 1:30 in Newport Richey.
Okay. Very good. Questions from up here?
Sure.
Right.
Chris?
I have a question. I know I sent you a question, Roberto, and thank you for getting back with me.
Yes, sir.
I'm still struggling with a little bit with the language because you mentioned project area. But when I look at, for example, just one of these sections, 403.1B6E, it talks about within the plan under the review, maybe that's sufficient, but then it says identify all invasive species, blah, 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 and then it says located on the uplands and within those portions of wetlands where impacts are authorized. I just want to verify that if I had a 100-acre parcel and I'm coming in with a project on 50 of those acres of that parcel, that you're only going to be looking at the 50 acres and not the total uplands of the entire parcel.
That is the intent, sir. Only those sections or portions of the parcel which are being worked on.
Okay, or any, of course, any wetlands that are impacted, but not the entire wetland system, only where the impacts are.
Right, as stated
Okay.
in this.
All right.
So, Roberto, that'd be the same, you know, when we talked yesterday, kind of, that's the same concept that we talked about under the operating permits, related to kind of the bigger sites, that the mines, for example, because I'm trying to find it, there it is. So section 404, where we've got language in there that deals with processing areas on sites for extraction of minerals, for example, in the context of a mine. But then there's also reference to the operations property. So we discussed this, I just want to go on the record to discuss that the operations, you know, what is the definition of the operations property if we're in the context of dealing with the mine where we've got numerous units that already exist on that site, and the applicant comes in for another unit to open up another unit, understanding that these regs are there's no retroactivity, it's all forward-looking, these would be applicable to that forthcoming unit that's coming in for permit, right? It doesn't apply to the entire site?
That's correct, Brad Tippman, Development Review Department. To answer both of those questions a little bit more succinctly, when any project comes in with a site plan, they have a boundary that's shown on their plans. So it's up to the applicant where they draw that boundary. If they draw that boundary around an entire parcel, then yes, you would be looking at the entire parcel. But if your impact project boundary is a subset of that, we would be looking at that subset. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Maybe I guess that, so I kind of still struggle with that operations property language in there, and I don't know if there's a better way to define that, or if there's a need for having that, the operations property in there. If there's something that can be done with that language, because I still struggle with that, because that brings in the idea of retroactivity to me, in that, you know, it is potentially open for the entire site. And I'm thinking more of the context of larger mines or landfills that are, you know, like Chris said, hundreds of acres. I was saying a mine, most of the property is nuked anyway, and they do keep it up, and the like for invasive species, I get that. But I think that operations property, that needs to be better defined, or maybe even stricken from the language.
And I would defer to the legal wording of it, the wordsmith of it, to the county attorney's office.
Okay.
So we'll look into that.
Okay.
The other question I had was on the invasive plant species management plan guidelines. And I know we talked about the fill last time, and I think you've changed it, but on page 2 of that document, it says fill, the select backfill shall be clean, well-graded material free from debris, peat, roots, seeds of nuisance or exotic species, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's still not really enforceable, is it? Or how
Well, I guess
I'm
first
concerned
question,
about that.
First question I have is, where in 403.6 does it talk about select fill? There's no reference to select fill in 403.6.
So this actual verbiage, I asked several engineers. I asked SwiftMud, I asked other engineers out of state, and I went to a conference, not related to invasive species, but where I run into a lot of friends and engineers. And this actual language is what I got from SwiftMud. This is directly from
That's not my
SwiftMud.
question. I said, where in 403.6 does it refer to select fill? Where is there a requirement for select fill?
Again, this statement right here, there's two
It
parts.
says
One
pertaining
part-
to LDC 403.6.
Yes, because
That's
we're making reference to the section
But
that
where
we
in that
actually took
section
out
does
from
it
the
talk
land
about
development
that?
code. We took it out, and this is the fill section. So there's the fill, and then it's tied to fill.
It's not. There's no reference. I have 403.6 in front of me, and there is not one reference to select fill in 403.6, nor any requirement to use
So
select fill.
403.6 fill is the section.
And
But
this,
he's referring to select fill
So
versus just
the
regular fill.
language to select fill
There's
is not
no
this section. This
reference
is
in
additional.
4036 to select fill. There's no place in that section of the land development code that references and/or requires select fill. It just talks about fill.
So what is select fill?
Well, and I'll beg to differ with the staff over what select fill is.
Well,
The
it's-
Department of Transportation has a definition, and this is an ordinance that deals with invasive species, not geohazards, not the geotechnical, that's the geotechnical engineer's job here. What's really going on here is that we talked about, actually, I think we were concerned that the last version of this ordinance contained requirements as to pertaining to the fill permit, that all fill be certified to be free of seeds of invasive species. And so what staff has chosen to do is to delete that. Well, we're not going to alter the fill permit of the section. We're just going to slip in this definition here in the guidelines and try to enforce it in a backdoor manner.
And again, you're correct. That's what we're trying to do, and if it doesn't work, it is a lot easier to change in this manual than if we were to adopt it in the land development code. So if we identify that there's issues with
The
that-
problem is, our concern was that there's no way. When I go to buy dirt, I have no way to verify whether or not it contains seeds, spores, rhizomes of invasive species. There's no readily available test for that. What am I supposed to do? Go get a sample of dirt and send it off to some biological lab at some university to try to determine that?
So as I was explaining to other commissioners,
Well,
we had a discussion.
But
they don't do it either.
Right.
Okay. Let me defer.
Commission, good afternoon. Keith Wiley, Director of Parks, Recreation, Natural Resources. In discussing this with the planning team, we had actually recommended to make a more generic term, just that the fill should be free of nuisance and exotic species, because we also, I think, are a tad bit concerned at what test would actually produce this result, right? And I know I wasn't at the last meeting, but I know there was a concern about cost, burden to applicants and things like that. I think that you need to reference that there should be, the intent of the material should be at a minimum, clean of exotic species and nuisance species. I think that's the goal. Quite honestly, trying to determine the
Have you
test.
ever purchased dirt before?
Have I purchased dirt
Yeah.
personally? No, I mean, through
Okay,
projects for
so-
the construction.
But I do.
Right.
All right?
So what do you recommend?
And when
sir?
I go to the mine that Chris just referenced,
Right.
I can assure you they don't have any documents down there that talk about whether or not the dirt they're selling out of their mine has any seeds or spores or rhizomes from invasive species.
Exactly.
Okay, that's not common. There's no readily available place for those mine owners or mine operators to go have that kind of determination made. I'm not dealing with rocket scientists on a construction site that drive dump trucks to a mine and get dirt and dump it on a construction site. They're not biologists, they're not environmental scientists, they don't have access to a university quality laboratory. So this seems to me to be just a bit of ridiculous environment, or requirement. The issue is here is whether or not an invasive species grows. Okay, they have no way to control what's in that dirt.
Right.
And when you have something that's spread by wind-borne seeds and rhizomes that are microscopic, how can one reasonably ever expect to know or be able to control that?
I don't disagree with you.
So,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so, we understand the intent, but I just don't see how fill is practical to be able to do that. I think maybe it was John last time. I mean, if we have a management plan to take care of the invasive species, if something does sprout up, then that management plan is gonna take care of it.
Correct.
So our concern, or my concern, at least from the school district's perspective, is the cost of anything. If somebody were to come out and say, well, have you checked this fill to make sure it's void? No, I mean, it's not We try to obtain clean fill, but there's no document saying that.
And I think that, you know, Mr. Williams, I feel like that's kind of the intent of what the team was trying to capture here. Maybe, Mr. Moody, to your point, maybe too far into the realm of difficulty and to, you know, making it a test. So if there's a way that we can agree on some terminology that honestly would allow us to maintain the intent.
I got two concerns. One, the staff just, when I suggested that this was a backdoor way to go around what our concerns were the last time, one, he just got up and admitted, yes, that is the intent. Well, that's not a professional way to act here.
Well,
the second problem that I have is, this is an ordinance that deals with invasive species. Now all of a sudden, I'm getting into the size of rocks, clods, peat. This isn't a geotechnical ordinance. There's a whole section of our code that deals with geotechnical requirements and geohazards, and I don't think any of the staff that worked on this is a geologist or a geotechnical engineer. And I'll tell you right now, this definition of select fill is not that of the Florida Department of Transportation. So somebody told you an organic content of 2%. I can tell you that they allow more, 3 times more.
Yeah, I think the reference was the
what does that have to do with what does that have to do with invasive species? It has nothing to do with invasive species.
Fair point. Again, I agree with you. I've deferred to Mr. Goldstein. Through this process, are we able to modify the proposed language to either strike or make recommendations to change?
You can agree to strike that whole fill section. I mean, and I was just to follow up on Mr. Moody's question and your response. I know that you don't personally buy fill, but the Parks Department certainly builds parks where they need to acquire fill. Are you confident that this paragraph is not going to drive up your cost of the Parks Department's cost of acquiring fill?
I don't think it's a cost issue. I think it's a probability issue, right? I don't think that there is a test out there that would kind of get you to this answer. So again, I think the recommendation.
If there was, it'd be costly.
Yes, correct.
I'd send my soil scientists out to do that.
We use that. I think exactly what Mr. Williams stated. We use the clean fill definition, or the intent of whatever clean fill is supposed to mean. So I think if we can agree that that's really what we're trying to accomplish here and get some proposed language.
I can tell you SwiftMud's language and no engineer's language all of a sudden included roots and seeds of nuisance or exotic species. I've been an engineer for 30 years and I know what the definition of select fill is, and there's a definition in the FDOT specification book. There's a definition in the AASHTO manual if you want to look it up, and I can assure you it doesn't talk about a nuisance or exotic species.
Is that a definition that we should be looking at, or are we talking about possibly
One, I don't think we should be looking at it at all. I understand what the concern is. All of a sudden, what I don't want is all of a sudden I got a regulation where now somebody's trying to redefine what select fill material is.
Or define it in the first place.
Well,
and you should be concerned about that because your county roadway contracts require the importation of select fill material. And I think you're going to get a big surprise in the cost of the fill material if all of a sudden you want to change the definition through the back door.
I guess the other concern, Keith, and why I'm suggesting you maybe you could strike it entirely is, I mean, you could have a parking lot where the fill is entirely covered with pavement. So there's no possible way that an invasive species is going to go up through the pavement. So what is the point of this? If this is about invasive species, I don't know what the point is of the requirement if it's entirely paved parking lot.
All I can continue to support is to say that at least my team's recommendation was to modify this section and strike it. So I think that would be my recommendation to the committee, and if anyone wants to entertain that.
So let me ask this question. So the ordinance seeks to impose these requirements for investigating whether there are invasive species present in different various applications. It might make some sense to me where we have development plans, construction plans, right-of-way permits. I'm trying to find the relevance. Why why would somebody submitting a substandard roadway evaluation need to do an invasive species survey? In fact, there's a definition in the Land Development Code in the substandard roadway section of what constitutes substandard roadway conditions. And a substandard roadway evaluation is simply that, an evaluation. It doesn't authorize the construction of anything. So why would somebody need to submit an invasive species survey to you to have substandard roadway conditions evaluated? And I'll ask the same for the access management permit. What does a driveway location have to do with invasive species?
Chris, do you have something? Chris?
What? No.
No.
Oh, you thought.
I guess, Keith, I want to get back to that question because a valid question. I know I expressed that to staff yesterday, but I want to go back up to like 10,000 feet here for a second. How did we get to this whole development of this invasive plant species management plan and the whole requirement for the preparation and submittal of a plan? Right. I mean, you're assigning responsibility not only to the development community, but also to your staff, which I can't imagine what your staff's going to grow to. I mean, you're going to become a manager of a manager of a manager of a department that's going to become ungodly big to review all these plans that are required to be submitted in perpetuity.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we get to, if I understand the goal correctly here, is to try to mitigate invasive species that are running rampant throughout the county, okay? Other counties and municipalities throughout the state and throughout the country handle that with other types of modifications and requirements to, when you submit development plans, you remove certain species on a targeted list off of your site.
Right.
I mean, I don't know a single person that wants to or purposely puts invasive species on their property. They're more than willing to take them out and to manage them where they can. But in some ways, in some applications, I mean, take Kogan grass. My understanding is Kogan grass is very difficult to even manage and almost impossible to eradicate.
Yeah.
So my question really, and I'll go back to it, is how did we get to this enforcement or this imposition of development of this invasive plant species management plan?
So I'll just be pretty concise on it. I mean, it's best management practices. So if you're going to require some kind of regulation that's going to cause someone to submit something, you have to at least make sure that it makes sense and that you can follow up on it. In terms of the scope of responsibility, Mr. Girardi, I would disagree with you. I think this is pretty easy thing to actually accomplish in terms of a one-page management plan that you would submit through an application process. And in terms of scope of work for staff, I already have a team of 5 that actually review applications, that they're in there doing wetland line jurisdictions and setting other things like that in the field already. So I think we need to be talking about the reality of what we would end up seeing.
You're saying a one-page management plan, just the requirements for the management plan are more than one page.
So, and I'll continue. So 7 or 8 other jurisdictions also have something similar, right?
Which ones are those?
So, I mean, Newport Richey, Hernando, City of Tampa, Temple Terrace, Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, Manatee.
One second, hold on, please. Hernando, because I pulled up 5 different municipalities around here. Right. Pinellas, Hillsborough, Sarasota. I went to Leon County. I mean, none of them had this, so that's why I'm asking. Yeah. So it's Newport Richey, Hernando,
and they're in. I mean, obviously, it's not everything's not the same. But in terms of the response, you brought up the intent. So in terms of the response to what we're trying to do, we have a comp plan policy, right, in the comp plan that says we have to control, manage invasive exotic species. We're directed by the BCC to come up with some kind of plan. Okay, so that's what you see before you is how we got there. And so also how you get there is developing an integrated pest management plan to address it. This could be something that I think Mr. Moody brought up, this could be kind of a one and done thing. I mean, this could be something is developed, you identify it, which could be identified on a very simple map with a few sentences, and then it's over and done with. There's no management and perpetuity, there's no long-term maintenance.
You're asking for them to record deed restrictions that they're going to deal with this in perpetuity.
And submittal of annual reports.
Annual reports, yeah.
Right, and again, you have to start somewhere. It's in the development guidelines, of which, as I understand from the planning team, can be easily modified.
Well, why don't we get it right the first time? Why are we gonna come back and modify it? Get it right the first time.
And that's not a true statement, because that's actually incorporated in the language of the ordinance.
So I can tell you from the perspective of our neighbors to the south, I mean, so yes, they do look at that, but you know, their species is basically limited, Melaleuca, Brazilian pepper, and Australian pine. They require reporting, never gets done. And
You
there's
said
never-
required reporting?
There is
Yeah.
required reporting, but it never gets done.
Yeah.
And it's never followed up on.
Right.
So, I mean, if we're talking about the intent,
Right.
you know,
Well-
to Mr. Girardi's point,
Again, teams tasked with developing a program. What you see is what we've put together.
So let me ask this question. So this is 905E5. It's already in our land development code. Plantings classified as prohibited, invasive, no use, invasive, and high risk in the central zone in the, quote, assessment of non-native plants in Florida's natural areas page of the University of Florida IFAS site shall be prohibited. Invasive species located within the area of the project proposed to be developed are required to be removed. Ongoing maintenance to prevent the establishment of prohibited invasive species is required. This is already part of our land development code. So the question that I have is, what are we doing to enforce? You're
It's an
proposing a
enforcement
new
issue.
law. We already have a law in the book. Why
Right,
don't you
and
just enforce the old law?
Well, and I think without some kind of guideline to actually do that, how do you get to that point?
Well, it's a simple. The invasive species on that page are prohibited, and ongoing maintenance to prevent the establishment of prohibitive invasive species is required.
So where's the
I've heard
accountability?
multiple times that there's Kogan grass in front of Murata. I drove by there on the way there today. There's not only Kogan grass, there's Ludwigia peruviana, and there's Brazilian pepper. Has anybody gone and asked the people at Murata to please remove the invasive species?
It's already part of the law, so.
It's already part of the law. They have an approved landscape plan. All you had to do was send code enforcement. But let me ask that. How, if we approve this ordinance, or the commissioners approve this ordinance, who's going to enforce it?
So, I guess that question's back to me. So we already have a team that reviews the natural resources side of the application process with an inspection team. We think that what we're asking today would not cause an increase in staffing or responsibility outside of just adding that one.
Are our code enforcement officers trained to recognize invasive species?
No, they're not.
So then somebody's going to have to pay to
And-
train
and
them,
so
right?
the natural, if you just let me finish, I'll explain. So the natural resources team has inspectors that can actually do this, already trained to do the work. So we
Then
wouldn't
why
have to
aren't they over
increase
at
staff.
Murata?
Because there's no guidelines on how to actually pursue enforcement. That's the issue at hand.
Denise, if someone violates the code, how do we enforce a violation?
There are procedures and civil citation, and there's procedures for that.
I don't understand what the problem is.
Comment on that?
So, well, I mean, yes, we have the ability to enforce violations of our land development code. What I don't, because I don't know if we have anybody from code enforcement here, I don't know if we've attempted to enforce the existing code and had issues with enforcing the existing code. And maybe Keith knows if we,
No, we have not, David. We don't have anyone trained, and we don't have the actual guidelines, and I think that was a part of this piece, was to kind of get that cleared up. With not the intent to put an immense burden on the applicant, quite honestly.
You are putting an immense burden. You're asking an HOA and a CDD to maintain the removal of and control of invasive species in perpetuity, and then submit a report to you on an annual basis. And I'm having a hard time, you know, for 30 years I've been getting permits from the Water Management District, and the Water Management District permits require that every couple of years that a professional engineer go out and inspect that system. So I have people that call my office, and they've gotten this computer-generated notice from the Water Management District saying that they need to get an inspection done, and they're all in a panic. And you know what I tell them? The district has like 100,000 permits. relax. They'll get to you in about 40 years before they figure out you haven't submitted the inspection report. And that's the problem. They require an inspection report. And because they have so many permits throughout the district, there's no possible way for them to keep up with that. And that's what I want to know. So you're going to do this with every site plan, every HOA, every CDD. You're going to need 10 departments from Sunday just to collect, process, review, and do whatever they're going to do with the reports. And at some point, you're going to have so many reports, you're going to need a whole building just to house them in a separate place, and you won't even know what reports you got.
So there is the possibility that you can talk about sunsetting the management in perpetuity, assuming that the site is clean of exotic species. That's additional language that you can put in there, but I don't think, I did this for Hillsborough County for 5 years, and I was one person. So, in addition to having other responsibilities. So I don't think it's as great of a responsibility.
I can tell you that I get permits in Hillsborough County, and no one's ever asked me to submit an invasive species evaluation or survey in 30 years either. And I do it in Pinellas County too, and I'm familiar with their habitat management permit. Got to get one on every project, but nobody makes me go out and identify and provide GPS locations and color photographs of Kogan grass or Brazilian pepper or air potatoes or anything
Can I just
else.
ask a simple question? What problems do these invasive species cause? What's the big deal?
I mean, quite honestly, it's more of like a natural plant community resiliency issue from a larger perspective. So this is a programmatic approach by the county. So Public Works has their program where they try to attempt to do what they can within the right-of-ways. Parks and Natural Resources does what they can on parks and natural resources and conservation lands. And this is the other piece. Quite honestly, the actual fourth or fifth piece to this would be private property. And back in the day, the federal government and the state governments used to have like a wildlife habitat incentive program where they would fund certain large landowners. They would cost share the maintenance. Unfortunately, those programs are no longer funded. But so this isn't the only piece of the puzzle. It's just one piece. And
the question I'm asking is, what problems do these invasive species create that are so intense and so damaging that we have to spend this much time and this much effort and this much money to deal with it?
Oh, it's just competition with the natural environment. I mean, that's, you know.
I go places where we used to have Australian pines. I think they're on your list. And the government goes out there and just poisons them all. I mean, it looks terrible. I don't understand it. And they're very good about holding that. They're usually in beach type areas, and they hold the sand together. Now sand washes away, you don't have a beach anymore. I mean, to me, this is just overkill.
I did a little reading on the FWC's website about the different invasive species, plant species, and there's some that compete with natural species of plants as well as animals, and they can damage the habitat of certain animals and things like that. I guess a good example of it is when you're going along the road, you see the vines that cover all the trees, kill all the trees. So that's a good example of invasive species. But that being said, it doesn't mean that it's as widespread as maybe it's been being made out to be.
The other thing is, I had met with staff on this, and I've still never gotten an answer to the question. In our current code, the section that I read, this refers to a document from the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences to determine these invasive species. And this proposed ordinance demands that we use the list published by the Florida Invasive Species Council. Why the inconsistency? What's the problem? And when I asked staff about it, they said, well, we want to use the FISC list, but I don't see a proposal here to change the list that's already on the books. What's the necessity in this ordinance to use the FISC list? And then the other thing that I would say is just exactly who is the FISC? Because I looked at their website, and they're basically a bunch of self-appointed, self-anointed, quote, experts. The governor didn't appoint them. The electorate did not elect them. These are just some people that got together and decided they're the ultimate authority of who should decide what's invasive and what's not. At least the list that's in the code currently is somewhat of a state organization.
Well, where do we want to go with this?
Mr. Chair, you do have some folks here that have signed up to speak on the matter.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to, are any other questions from the staff?
Just one for me, if you know, we're talking about the burden of an annual report, is an initial report or an initial plan submittal enough to give you all the sort of methodology to enforce, you think? Like if you have a one-time plan and they've got to maintain per that plan in perpetuity, you've got a document that allows you to enforce, do they necessarily need to report every year? I mean, what would be the intention, I guess, for enforcing, you get the initial plan, they identify species, are staff going to go out and verify that they identified all the species?
Through an inspection, that's the intent, but in some cases, you know, it could just be a letter of note. It doesn't have to be a full-blown second or third or fourth report.
Let me take that question a little bit further. So this proposed ordinance applies to right-of-way permits, and at my request, and I appreciate this staff, they removed any imposition of this requirement on residential properties. But I don't think you guys understand the total magnitude or scope of right-of-way permits. So Frontier Communications decides it wants to come in and put fiber optic internet service in their neighborhood, and they go to the Public Works Department and apply for a right-of-way permit to directional drill conduits. So now does Frontier Communications have to hire an environmental scientist and a biologist to go out and first identify if there are any, based on the language of this ordinance, they'd have to go out and identify invasive species before they can get their permit. They have nothing to do with these species. They're there to directional drill a conduit, which means they're going to dig a hole this big for the drill rod to go in, and they're going to dig a hole this big on the other end of the drill shot to pull the conduit back. And all of a sudden, they've got to go out and pay some PhD to come out and determine whether or not there are invasive species out there. That just doesn't seem reasonable.
Keith, on the reporting side, I'd offer too. I mean, if that is gonna be a requirement that goes forward, you already went down this path saying, you know, have that requirement sunset, and I would agree with that, whether that be on a year's basis or even looking at, you know, what we do on the wetland side, where you monitor their success criteria that are met,
Right.
and it's released. I mean,
Yep.
we could do something like that. I mean, I agree with what Mr. Moody and Mr. Girardi said. I don't think you understand, and I appreciate that you did this for Pillsbury County, but I think the burden that you're creating is I think it's far more than you're considering.
Okay.
Yeah, I personally, if the language that John read is in the development code already, to me, it's an enforcement issue of that code, and I don't see the need to develop these whole plan guidelines. So that's, I'm really opposed to the whole plan guidelines and how they just broad sweep every single type of plan submittal that's out there.
Jamie, I want to try to give you a little insight. I think where the plan guidelines came from is a meeting that I had with staff when they were meeting with us individually. One of the things that I had suggested was that, by way of example, the water management district presumes that if you retain or filter the first half-inch of runoff over a project, that you're presumed to have met the state water quality standard. And what I asked staff to do was develop something that was a presumptive criteria. If you do these things, you are presumed to have met your invasive species burden. I don't know whether they misunderstood me. What we're getting here is, if you submit me a giant report like this, you'll be presumed to have met the burden of satisfying the report requirement. The other question I'd have of staff is, and I find this actually interesting, because nowhere in here does it actually suggest how one might get rid of these invasive species. And I'd like to ask the county people. So it says that I have to, in my invasive species management plan, tell you how I'm going to dispose of it and make sure that it's done in a manner where it's not going to propagate. So I'm going to take it to the county landfill over on Hayes Road. Now it's your invasive species. What are you going to do to make sure it doesn't propagate? How do you do that?
I think you're speaking in extremes, quite honestly, and at this point,
That's what the thing says.
I don't.
If I take it
I
to
have
the
no further-
landfill,
I
what
have
do
really
they
no-
do to make sure it doesn't propagate?
I have no further comments unless anyone has a direct question to me of what's been presented, so.
Well, I think we need to listen to questions from the public and then try to come up, offer some solutions, you know, anything from, we don't want to do this, to something in between. Because we need to get to a result here. So Roberto, you started all this now.
Mr. Chair, the first person I have registered to speak is Jennifer Sini. And it's going to be followed by Cheryl Magaloon and Sharon Holding, and then Ralph Bugamelli.
Okay. So we have your name and address, please.
Yes, I know the drill. Thank you, Mr. Gray.
You're welcome.
Jennifer Sini, 25605 Apple Blossom Lane, Wesley Chapel, Florida.
And before you start our time, I've been working with Jennifer since, I don't know how long, 2004, 5.
No, we have known each other and been acquainted with each other. I don't recall ever working with you.
ELAP.
That was, yeah.
Many years ago.
And you were not a part of that
Yes, I was.
committee, but I do recall having conversations with you. So that means what I was going to say is relevant, which is I go back 3 decades, and I've been participating in Pasco County issues for many years. My most proud accomplishment was getting the Environmental Lands Program in 2000, and then funding it with a penny for Pasco in 2004. I have a penny Pasco buddy here on your committee. We worked our buddies off through 3 pennies, and I've worked on all of those campaigns. I now am serving on the board of directors of the Tampa Bay Conservancy, which is a local land trust which works to preserve important ecosystems in the Tampa Bay area through fee simple purchase and also through conservation easements. I watched your May discussion, and I'm hearing the same discussion today that I heard in May. As a matter of fact, it's a little bit louder and a little bit more vociferous than it was in May. So you've obviously been churning this over time. Well, so have I, because I was really surprised to hear how much into detail you wanted to get, when most of the detail will be handled during the individual site development application work. And to me, that's quite clear, but obviously it's where you all have gotten stuck. So we do need to work on getting out of that rut, because to me, it sounded like y'all were missing the forest for the trees. I would like to point out, and I won't read it to you because it was in the presentation, the conservation element of the comprehensive plan requires that an invasive planning mechanism be implemented. That's what we're trying to do today. So to answer the question a little less emotively, invasive plants are deadly invaders. They grow fast, aggressively, they climb to the top of trees, they cover entire forest floors, they build hugely dense root systems, they smother estuaries, they smother fish hatcheries. They kill our native plants and thus kill our native species. So remember two things while you continue this difficult process. Remember the gopher tortoises, and remember pollinators. A pine flatwoods that is choked out with soda apple is going to starve your gopher tortoises. Gopher tortoises are commensurate with at least 300 other species. That means they are a keystone species and important to over 300 species. We need to keep the gopher tortoise. We don't need to starve them. And then the other thing I want to say is every farmer has problems with pollination these days. It's gotten so bad that they rent pollinators, something they never had to do decades ago. And the reason being is that native pollinators need native plants to feed and to breed. Without them, farmers have problems. Overall, and I think Mr. Girardi, you said, let's look at the overall picture. Mr. Poole, you may have said the same thing. Mr. Gray, I hope I answered your question about why invasive species are so important to control. But overall picture, it's time for us to do this. We are required by the comp plan, and it's never too late. Some of you have even said, it's overwhelming, it's too late. It's never too late to do the right thing. So, pardon me, I want to ask you to recommend this ordinance in some form to the county commissioners, and I wish you luck on figuring out your issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for all your work. All these decades. I really appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Cheryl McAloon, and my address is 3120 Flat Rock Place in Land O'Lakes. And again, my name is Cheryl McAloon. I am a 25-year resident of Land O'Lakes, residing in Lake Padgett. I'm an active member of the Nature Coast chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. And my subject today is going to be the Category 1 invasive species known as the air potato. The air potato is a heart-shaped vine that can grow extremely quickly, roughly even 8 inches a day. It typically climbs to the tops of trees and has a tendency to take over native plants. This vine self-seeds freely from the bulbils, they're like a potato, to take over native plants. The vine self-seeds freely. This exotic vine from Asia can quickly take over a natural area and smother native vegetation. It can form a solid canopy off lights, and it cuts off lights to plants below, and all resulting in the decrease or removal of the wildlife habitat. Now, if I could bring your attention to a new housing development, the towns at Lake Thomas, developed by Lanier. It is located on US 41 between Aaron Cutoff and Connerton. The development resides on US 41, and it backs up to residences on Little Lake Thomas, Big Lake Thomas, and a wooded conservation area. It is worthwhile noting that Lennar is still in the process of selling these units. Prior to the development being clear-cut, it was home to pasture, hosting primarily cows. And at that present time, air potato existed on that property. However, since the clear-cut and the completion of almost 200 townhomes, the air potato vine is still present and made worse because it was not handled correctly, possibly contaminated equipment or throwing of the seeds during the clearing and mowing operation. Proper removal of the plants would have prevented the spread and establishment of more destructive air potato vines. I recently observed the air potato vine behind the development at extreme heights. Although the development's landscape is attractive, the vine is making its way through the rear common areas and encroaching on property lines. This is the result of improper clearing and virtually no regard for the development itself and neighboring areas. In closing, I encourage the Planning Commission to consider and approve the amendment discussed today, and my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Appreciate that.
Good afternoon. My name is Sharon Holden, 11705 Emmaus Cemetery Road in San Antonio. I have lived in Pasco County for over 30 years and have been an active member of the Native Plant Society for 20. I am here to show support for changes to the Land Development Code regarding invasive species. For 11 years, I volunteered at Warner Boys Salt Spring State Park in West Pasco, spending a good deal of my time working with others to remove areas overwhelmed by invasives, almost creating dead zones, such as Brazilian pepper, air potato, and Caesar weed. All the while knowing that on the other side of the fence line in the surrounding properties were stands of those same invasives, loaded with berries and seeds and potatoes. I am aware of the time and money spent by government agencies to try and control invasives after the fact. I've lived in San Antonio in East Pasco now for 2 years, and along State Road 52, I've watched as large areas of Kogan grass grow and spread. On my own property, I am removing dense stands of camphor trees and coral ardisia to allow native plants to return. Native plants provide for our wild birds and animals like nothing else can, as they have evolved together. I worry about what our county will look like in the future if we don't act now. I believe that whatever can be done should be done as soon as possible to curtail the damages from invasives to our communities. We should plan and act now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name's Ralph Bogamelli. I'm a resident of Land O'Lakes, 2947 Calvano Drive, and I'm here. I'm part of the Native Plant Society. I just want to point out that when I first came here from Michigan about 8 years ago, my home was a brand new home. Everything was leveled before they built, and when I did get my house landscaped, it was completely done with non-native plants. I didn't have any hummingbirds, any butterflies, any bees, or anything like that. I found it kind of strange coming to Florida. But since joining the Native Plant Society, I realized that I started putting some plants in, and I started getting hummingbirds and these sort of things. And so that made me ever more interested in finding out more about how to propagate these plants, and also learned about invasive species. These invasive species, as a matter of fact, I had one in my backyard. It was a rattlebox plant. It's from Asia and India. And so I've been trying to get rid of it, and I have, but you have to identify it first and then start to, pull it out. And I was having some success. One of the other things, we did some walks on our tours to some of the native parks around here, or natural parks, and we found out that there were the Caesar plant, which is another invasive species. These are the kind of things that take over the natural plants, and they eliminate some of the birds and the bees and other non-native species, will prevent them from feeding on those type of plants. I really think that any effort you do to improve the elimination of invasive species, I think is a great thing. I know you've got some real problems on how to handle that, but I think you can come up with something that would be beneficial when you finally do your ordinance. And so one thing I have in addition to this is that when you do clear cuts like this, you've gotten rid of a lot of native plants. If there was a way that you could get builders that when they do their plans for the common area or something like that, it'd be nice to put native plants in their place to help restore some of the ones that they've knocked out during their development period. So thank you for your efforts in this area.
Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Chair, that was the last person who signed up to speak, so I'm not sure if you want to.
Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak that did not sign up? I don't see any volunteers. Okay. All right, so...
So I do have a question for
yes.
Roberto and Keith, or both, one or both of them.
Come on up, Keith. You take a beating, can't you?
So I want to follow up on a question that Mr. Moody raised, which is 905.2E5. I'm trying to figure out why that section is inadequate to address the issue. And because it does clearly require ongoing maintenance to prevent the establishment of prohibited invasive species. Is the concern that it doesn't identify who has to do it? I'm just trying to figure out what the problem is with the existing code.
So is that underneath the landscaping section, David?
Yeah. It's in the landscape, except it's in the landscaping section of the code.
It refers to planted materials, so I think like the actual enforcement is just tied to things that you would plant. And then I think what we're all talking about, and I probably should have had them speak before me because they did a great job talking about the impact on exotic species, but we're talking about the existing conditions of undeveloped pieces of land. So unless Mr. Moody interprets it differently.
No, I just read plain English. It says invasive species located within the area of the project proposed to be developed are required to be removed. Ongoing maintenance to prevent the establishment of prohibited invasive species is required.
And furthermore, 802.3F4 states invasive or exotic species located within a project area shall be removed. Period. I can't speak for everybody up here. I don't want anybody to misunderstand that. I do understand that the management and removal of exotic and invasive species is terribly important. I see it, I understand that. My problem is more the mechanism we're choosing to go and the route we're choosing to go with forcing this management plan with all of these requirements, these reporting requirements, this tremendous burden that's getting placed not only on the development community, but on the HOAs, the CDDs, on county staff. That's where my rub is. It's not on the requirement for the removal of invasive species.
So, if I wasn't really finished with my question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead and interrupt.
So, because I'm trying to help staff, I'm trying to figure out, is there something, because I asked our code enforcement attorneys if we've ever cited anybody for violating the section, and the answer I got was no. All right, so, but I don't know if there's a reason for that. In other words, I don't know if somebody looked at this, our code enforcement team, like, did they not get a complaint about it, and so they never went to investigate an invasive species, or did our code enforcement team look at this section and say, I can't cite anybody for that because of X, Y, or Z? And so I'm trying to figure out what is it that's stopping us from. I mean, I'm assuming somebody on your team, not you, but Roberto, somebody looked at this section 5 and concluded that it's inadequate, because that's why you came up with this other enforcement scheme. So what was it that was inadequate about section? Because the section Mr. Girardi cited doesn't deal with ongoing maintenance. That's right. So if this was just about plantings, I don't think that the section Mr. Girardi cited would be sufficient. But E5 actually talks about ongoing maintenance, which is, to me, is driving your need for this reporting requirement. And so is there a problem with that sentence that is causing staff to not enforce this today?
So David, originally when I was tasked with invasive species and look into it, I did look at the different sections and the comp plan and anything that was related to invasive species. I did find that section and I made my suggestions. We have these, we have sufficiency on these elements. Okay, they don't have that document with me. And I was asked by management and said, no, we need something more strict. We need something to follow, the guidance from the BCC. We need something that aligns more with what are being requested. And that's what prompted changing into all these other elements in the sections and subsections.
I mean, one potential issue with that last sentence is it doesn't say who has to maintain it. I mean, but I don't know if that was the reason why you.
Well, it would be those who that section is applicable to.
Right, but I don't know because, where you might have an issue is if you went to cite the subsequent owner, where the subsequent owner says that was the developer's responsibility, it wasn't my responsibility. So, yeah, that could easily be fixed by identifying who is responsible for this ongoing maintenance, but that would have been adding 5 words, not the whole thing. So,
maybe an amendment to that section.
Well, but that's why I'm asking is, was there any discussion of just amending E5 to cure whatever the potential enforcement issues are with existing? Because one could argue, and I agree with Jennifer saying that our comp plan requires us to do this, but one could argue that E5 already complies with the comp plan. So, but obviously, for whatever reason, we haven't enforced it to date. That leads me to believe there's some problem with the existing code which is causing us to not cite people for it, but I don't know what it is.
Right. So David, I can't, a little late in the game in terms of the development of the new ordinance, but I do know that without any clear guidelines, it's difficult for any, I'm just thinking of like wetland infractions and how we got to that part in terms of working with code enforcement. Question I was just asking Brad is, without the creation of a new ordinance, because I'm hearing what everyone's saying, could we develop something that is a little lighter in a development guideline tied to the section of the code that you're referencing, David, taking all the comments and stuff like that we've heard, and still give some directions, though, because you might have an LDC section that says all this shall be removed, we still need to give a little bit of direction on what that means. Does it need to be PhD level, geology reports kind of stuff, but I do think we need some kind of simplistic guideline to at least give the applicant. So, and I think any applicant would want clear direction on what that would be. So I guess the question I'm asking maybe the planning team or David, if we have an LDC section that is sufficient to be the mechanism to require the enforcement action, can we develop a very light or similar guideline, document that would go in the development guidelines manual?
So are you suggesting that the existing code isn't clear about what ongoing maintenance means? It's not, there's no specific criteria there for what that means, and so
there's no reference to the species in question. I mean, there needs to be something.
Well, there is a reference to the species.
Is there?
That is there, but
okay.
If what you're saying is that it doesn't define what removal is, or doesn't define what ongoing maintenance is,
or how in terms and things like that.
I mean, I guess
it's species defined as invasive, high risk in the central zone on the assessment of non-native plants in Florida's natural areas page of University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Science manual.
To the crux. Their obligation is, you just have to read the 4 words after it. It says ongoing maintenance to prevent the establishment of prohibited invasive species is required.
Right.
That's
so
your
I think,
burden.
So I think what staff would need is some guidance to how do you actually implement what that is.
Personally, I like the direction that you're moving now.
Yeah. Okay.
To me, it makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
Right. Because, you're dealing with the real problem. You're not creating a monster.
Because the root of David's question, and that's my question, what's stopping someone from going out to and that's a great example, the townhomes of Lake Thomas today, and citing them and telling them that they need to get rid of air potato.
I think clear direction on how to do that. I honestly,
What-
I mean, just to be.
I'm not understanding that. What do you mean clear direction on how to do that?
So,
What direction is it that
Maybe,
you think you
maybe
need?
area, maybe team of responsibility, area of accountability. I'm not exactly
Well, that's
sure.
probably where the problem is. It's
So-
not the ordinance, it's how do we enforce it?
Right.
Well,
You pointed that
All
out.
right,
before,
so
Keith.
I'm just
Yeah.
confused, and I'm not trying to be argumentative by asking this question. I go in and I design and permit a subdivision, which includes a landscape plan under 905 in the land development code, so I'm subject, and if I removed trees or whatever in the 806 section that Jamie cited, I don't understand, so I have a permit I'm subject to all of these requirements. I don't understand where the difficulty comes in by staff to enforce the code. No different than the zoning code. I got a guy coming to visit me tomorrow who got a citation for parking semi-trucks on his property. Staff goes out and sees semi-trucks, they don't have an approved site plan, you cite them. Here you've got an approved landscape plan, you're in violation because you allowed these invasive species to propagate.
So
You cite them.
It could be
Can I
training
ask-
for code enforcement officers. or
Yeah,
it
a
could
question
be
for Mr.
staff.
Moody. So in the post-development scenario of the lands, you're saying that authority would rest underneath that section of the code that's tied to the landscaping plan? And that's why I keep going back to, this is not about planted
In our
material.
landscape section of the code, and this is interesting because I know there are actually active cases going on right now, you're required to maintain your landscaping. So for instance, I'm personally aware of code enforcement cases where code enforcement officers go down State Road 54 with approved landscape plans and they say, oh, look, there was supposed to be a live oak tree there and a laurel oak tree there and a row of viburnum shrubs over there, and there's 3 shrubs missing and that shrub's missing, and then they give them a citation for $500 for each tree or shrub that's missing. So they're still enforcing that plan.
So 9052E5 already addresses stuff that already exists. It addresses the prohibition against planting anything, and it also addressed stuff that may exist in the future, ongoing management. So it addresses all that.
Good, so does that, again, don't have the code in front of me, David.
I mean,
But
it's
hold
a
on,
paragraph.
Dave,
I can
let me
read the whole
ask
thing.
David a quick question. Does that cover all the applications that the board wanted us to consider?
Assuming we're not making this retroactive, and that it's only governing, which was, I think, staff's intent, was that it was only dealing with those projects that submitted a landscape plan. So if they submitted a landscape plan, this already says that they can't plant invasives, they have to remove invasives, and they have to have ongoing maintenance to prevent the establishment of prohibited invasive species. So that was the root of my question, is there something deficient about that code section I'm trying to be objective here, because my code enforcement attorneys have said they've never seen a site for this. So that leads me to believe that there's a reason for that. I don't know, and I'm trying to get what is the underlying reason why we haven't cited anybody for violating this code section.
If I had to speculate, it's the how-to piece. And I get that it's easy to send a citation, that's easy, but the how do you take care of that after the fact? And is that mulching on site? Is that herbicide treatment? Is, all the various things.
Keith, you've just hit on what my biggest problem with this proposal is. And I said this during the first hearing. Kogan grass was introduced to the United States in the 1920s. It's been here for 100 years. Our greatest scientists, our universities, our U.S. Department of Agriculture, our Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Service, nobody has figured out how to get rid of it. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't try to get rid of it, or that I want it around, I don't. But at the end of the day, you can't tell me how to get rid of it, the county staff can't tell me how to get rid of it, and all of a sudden, I'm gonna make the land developer, it's now Lennar's problem to figure out how to get rid of it. And you know, Lennar buys a site that's covered with air potato, they clear it, it comes back. Lennar didn't introduce the air potato, it was there. And they got rid of most of it. It's coming back. Maybe they should be doing something to manage it. I'm not saying they shouldn't be. But you can't tell me how to manage it. The staff can't tell us what to do with it. So how do you expect the development community or the guy, let me be careful with my words here, the guy who does the directional drilling for Frontier Communications or Spectrum to figure out how to get rid of it?
I think that's kind of a moot point, because we're being directed to do something. And I think that no one's saying that we're going to eradicate.
So Keith, what I'm hearing you say is that the existing code doesn't provide enough detail as to how you do that ongoing maintenance. So my question is, could a sentence be added saying the development review manual will contain the permitted ongoing maintenance techniques?
Yes.
So David,
and then you just have the development review manual identify permissible maintenance.
Yes.
and that goes back to the original request I made of staff. Can you please provide a plan which is presumptive in nature? Okay, if I do A, B, and C, I am presumed to have met my burden to control this species. If you tell me I need to burn it, I need to poison it, I need to grind it up and bring it to the landfill, just tell me what it is I need to do. Right. Because all the scientific experts in the world haven't figured out how to get rid of this either.
Yeah. So, what I think would be helpful, and I think you're basically saying, could we create a safe harbor provision that says, because that's the problem I see with the existing code, and I asked our code enforcement attorney, I don't have a response yet, but if we had to enforce this in court, I don't know that it may be difficult for us to, I could see a defendant saying, well, I don't know what ongoing maintenance to prevent the establishment of prohibited. I mean, they could argue that our code is ambiguous and it's unenforceable because it doesn't say what the maintenance activities are. So I think what Keith is saying is he wants to create guidelines for maintenance to prohibit these invasive species.
To be clear, I want to help do that. I don't know if I necessarily want to be raising the banner on this,
but again, just to be clear, that's an establishment of, to control air potato, you do A, B, C, to do this, you do D, E, and F. It's not developer or the HOA will come up with a plan on how they're going to manage it.
Well, you could refer to that manual in this code.
Right, but I mean, they could put those...
The manual's my biggest heartburn. I want that manual, like, gone. I'll be quite blunt. I mean,
well, I mean, you could put all of those maintenance techniques in the code, but it's going to make the code longer.
I thought he was putting in the development guide and the guidelines that references what.
But our guidelines get put into the development review manual. That's where we put them.
Okay. Let's just pick a set of best management practices to reference, and that's the source.
So that is, Brad Tiven, development review, that is the essential function of the development review manual. It's simply for business procedures and reference materials, different things like that, not necessarily specific elements that would go with code.
It is easier to amend the development. Say some scientist comes up with some miracle for getting rid of Kogan grass. It's easier to amend the development review manual to add that technique into the manual than to amend the land development code.
So you could also, the development manual or a couple sentences in the LDC could talk about the formatting of how this notice would be sent to the county. You can always refer to the BMPs through other organizations necessarily. You don't need to create, we don't need to recreate the wheel. I think Mr. Moody's pointed out very clearly that people have been discussing this for a really long time. What we're trying to do is all of the puzzle pieces here is quite honestly figure out how the applicants in the development industry, future landowners, help us kind of figure this out. So I don't know really what the next step is. I mean, I'd be happy to work with the planning team on trying to clean up the guideline and make it a little more leaner and to address the concerns that I've heard today.
Well, I think it depends on what staff and the planning commission want to do. But I mean, if staff is okay with just adding a sentence to 5 that says that the permitted ongoing maintenance activities are set forth in the development review manual, I mean, that's a fairly simple change to the code, and then you would then bring, you'd bring those techniques into the manual. That's a very different change. That's adding one sentence, which is very different than what's before the planning commission today.
And would that then make it enforceable to code enforcement?
It would make, again, I'm not the code enforcement attorney, but I think if there was objective criteria for maintenance outlined in the manual, it would make it easier for us to cite people and enforce it, because now you've got objective maintenance. Sort of Mr. Moody's point, this is the safe, if you do these things, you will have deemed to have met our code.
Yeah, I like that.
And just to be clear, we will do, like you said, that would be by reference in the manual, because we're not gonna spell out 100 pages worth of stuff. We're gonna reference the best management practice at such and such website.
And you leave a lot of this to me.
Right, so, yeah, so, they will have
The code amendment, the LDC amendment is literally one sentence.
Yes, for this.
But I think you then would move all of your maintenance requirements into the development review manual, and that's where you put them.
Yeah,
Now, what it does
or
get rid of,
reference
Keith, to be clear, if you're willing to go in this direction, is it gets rid of any reporting requirement or plan requirement.
I think, again, I think you gotta start with at least putting, you have a comp plan policy with nothing, at least with not clear enough direction to county staff to implement something, so I think that's going in the right direction at the end of the day.
I'm just, again, this is not my decision, I'm not the policymaker, but maybe you should, if you tried that first, where you create objective criteria in your development review manual, and then you try to enforce it, go ahead and start citing people for violating it, and then if that's insufficient, then you come back with something more substantive and say, we tried to do what Mr. Moody suggested, and it failed for the following reasons, and so we have to do something more stringent.
Yeah, so just kind of going back in history with wetland infractions, so the recommendation from the county attorney's office at the time was to develop something in the LDC specifically that we can lean on to for enforcement. But as long as it's enforceable, I think we can actually, at least take a stab at what you suggested.
Well, reading, again, I've not conferred with all my code enforcement attorneys, but looking at 5 as is, I think the problematic sentence is the last sentence. Okay, because I'm not entirely sure whether a judge would say that's objective criteria for what is ongoing maintenance to prevent the establishment of prohibited invasive species, because that could be many different things, and then you got a battle of the experts in court about the defendant calls an expert and says, well, I tried these things and it didn't work, and then we call on it. So I think there probably is some merit, even that would help our code enforcement attorneys, if there's objective maintenance criteria that says this is what we deem to be okay in terms of maintenance. So, and I'm assuming you can come up with that because that was your intent.
Yes.
So do you have a language you want to recommend for the ordinance?
Well, I guess the question really is, I don't know what staff and planning commission want to do, because that's a very different ordinance from what's before you today. What's before you today creates more of a plan and reporting type requirement to deal with this issue. The discussion we just had is more of beefing up the language that allows us to use code enforcement.
Well, if I can read the board, I think that's the direction that.
So I don't know whether staff would prefer that this be continued, or would staff would prefer that.
If I can speak to that, I think that probably the best thing to do in this situation is if you do not like the way this ordinance was going, that you would recommend denial of this ordinance to the board with the recommendation of the alternative that we just talked about with the sentence change, then we can take both forward and the board work through which one they feel is best.
That's really up to the planning commission. I can't tell you what to do. This is your, now it's a policy decision for you all as to what.
Well, I'd like to, I'm sorry, we don't speak from the
She's
floor.
asking to speak if she has her name on the list.
Did you have your name on the list?
I did not, because I'm pretty much a coward to speak in public. I'm hearing some things that just seem so,
Ma'am,
You can't speak
cannot
from the floor, first of all.
If the chair's willing to let you speak, you need to come to the podium. But I don't know if the chair's okay.
Yeah, I'll let you speak. This is very out of character, so.
and I appreciate that sort of because it's
Don't speak until you get to the microphone.
My name is Eva Bailey. I live at 8915 Quail Run Drive, Wesley Chapel, Florida. And this terrifies me. I want that to be official, so I'm not going to sound professional. But I'm just listening to the conversation about requiring a developer to monitor something and send a report in when they monitor that thing to show that they're doing what they say they're going to do is not a foreign thing to developers. When they have to impact a wetland, and then they have to recreate it somewhere else on their property to mitigate for that impact, they have to plant, a certain size. They have to then maintain that site to remove nuisance plants. Nobody tells them how to do it. They just have to have nuisance plants below a certain percent cover. So they pay people to do that, and my company was one of those people, to do that. So they maintain those plants, they make sure they survive, they make sure they get to a certain height, they make sure they get to a certain cover, the desirable native plants, and that they keep the cover of nuisance plants below a certain small percentage so that site is successful. And they have to do that until they are released from that monitoring. Now, supposedly they have to do it in perpetuity, but as you say, when they're released, who has time to go look at that again? So many of these mitigation areas may become overrun by nuisance plants, but still, on the books, they have to still meet those success criteria. And this is something developers have been having to do for a long, long time. And now it's as if asking a developer to report and maintain something is like a foreign thing. I mean, how could you ask us to do that? Well, they've been having to do this kind of thing forever. It will cost them some money, yes, absolutely. And every person who buys a house in that development will probably pay a few dollars more because of it. But nuisance plants really are something that need to be addressed in this county, all over the state. The Withlacoochee came and laid a power pole on the side of the road in my neighborhood in preparation for putting it up. And a few months later, there was a line of Kogan grass on the right-of-way. Never had Kogan grass there before. So that pole was probably laying in a field of Kogan grass before they moved it. They didn't know there were, there's nobody overseeing or making them make sure they weren't moving Kogan grass, excuse me, to my neighborhood, but they did. And now I watch it march down the road. And I've seen places out in the mining areas that are just solid Kogan grass. And it's not just Kogan grass, but I'm just saying, with some oversight and with some care, that kind of movement of nuisance plants would not be as bad as it is now. So education and getting this kind of reporting and causing people to, excuse me, thank you, to keep watch on this and report on it. I mean, we're saying that what the county's doing now, you've got a code now, and it's not working. So to go back and say, just use the code, but wait a minute, that's not working. So just
Well, I don't
two
think
cents, and
we're
I'm
not
sorry.
we're not saying go back and use the code. We're saying make adjustments to the code. But your 3 minutes is up, and
Can I ask her a
appreciate the
question,
opportunity.
though?
Yeah, go ahead,
Sure.
quickly.
So, are you aware that in the proposed ordinance, there's no obligation for the developer to go into a wetland on site unless it's being impacted, but non-impacted wetlands to go in and remove nuisance and exotic species?
I did hear those words, yes.
So that actually contradicts just what you just said. This ordinance, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm very familiar with wetland mitigation and the requirements to maintain and monitor and report back to the Water Management District. But the staff's proposed ordinance actually doesn't even require them to go into the existing wetlands and remove exotics and nuisance species, which I was shocked, frankly, when I read that.
I think that Keith Wiley, Director of Parks, Recreation, Natural Resources, the purpose for that is there's already a permitted function in place that addresses that, Mr. Moody, so no reason to be duplicative.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for allowing me to.
Okay.
so I
Thank
do
you.
want to make one more comment, and again,
Yeah.
it's up to Planning Commission about whether you go with what's before you or some modified version of E5, but if staff's intent is to not enforce this against individual residential lot owners, which your provision says, the ordinance before us says that you will not,
Right.
then that would probably, I said E5, the addition could be one sentence, it probably needs to be two sentences if you're not going to enforce E5 against individual residential lot owners.
We absolutely have to make sure that that's in there. That's correct.
Because E5 as written, in theory, would allow Mr. Moody to call code enforcement on his neighbor if they had a single blade of cloven grass.
And he
So-
would too.
That was not.
No, I disagree with that, because when a developer submits a landscape plan associated, he's not designing the landscaping on every individual lot. For instance, at Murata, they're gonna provide a landscape plan for their grand entrance with all the fancy fountains and all of that, but they're not designing the landscaping on Mr. Gray's lot.
Yeah, all I'm saying is that I think it would be helpful to not just clarify the safe harbor issue, but also clarify who we're going to enforce against. If this is really developers, HOAs, and CDDs, it probably needs to come out and say that, as opposed to.
Yes, we may need to actually, one sentence is probably going to turn into a little paragraph, but you know, we also have the situation where we don't want to preempt an HOA or a CDD from dealing with a problem within their own subdivision, just because the county is saying that it's not going to be within our jurisdiction, or we're not going to do it. So, like, we may not want to go after an individual residential lot owner.
So
but
Mr.
an
Moody,
HOA
I understand your point, but arguably the residential lot is within the plan that was under review.
And I'm not actually against what you're suggesting. I would actually be supportive of what you're suggesting, David.
Yes. Okay.
So we can do that. I did have one additional question there, as far as procedurally, are we going to need to renotice that if that change is made and this goes to the board with that? Is that a notice issue, or?
Well, first of all, your title gets a lot shorter.
There's that, save a tree.
So, but,
I think it's
I
already been
prefer
noticed.
that you redo a notice for the board hearings. I don't know that you need to renotice.
So this would go forward as a recommendation of denial on the same notice with an alternative recommendation.
I mean,
correct?
I guess one problem is, as long as your title is, I'm not sure you actually said you were amending E5.
Correct.
So
That wasn't the intent
So then you probably do need to do a new notice. The one section of the code you were not amending was the one we're talking about amending. So yes, you probably would need to renotice that.
Okay, so based on Planning Commission making an alternative recommendation. we would
But
need
I'll
to
be clear,
renotice.
you could just renotice that for the board hearings.
Right.
It doesn't have to be,
Right.
you don't have to, but it depends on what you all want to do. I'm not sure whether the consensus is this is just gonna move on to the board, or if the consensus is that you all want to continue this and have this come back to the Planning Commission. That's not my call.
I think a big component of this is enforceability, which is really outside of our purview anyway. So that's something the board's gonna have to take up anyway.
Yeah, I think that I agree. I think that this probably should move forward one way or the other. I don't know that continuance is gonna really gain much ground on it, so.
My personal preference would be to continue it so that we can come back, look at the proposal for an amended section 905, and hopefully have some consensus amongst all of the parties and stakeholders. I hate to go to the board with a recommendation of denial like that. I think it's important that we have consensus and agreement.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that too. So anyway, I think we've heard everything we need to hear, right? Are we at a point where we can make a motion?
How long would it take to come back with some alternative proposal that deals with section 905 rather than all these other, rather than the proposal that's been placed on the table today?
I think that's the direction we want to go.
You're not having to throw the baby out with the bathwater with all the work that's been done, obviously. A lot of this stuff can move over to that.
We do believe from what we've heard today that these are two very drastically different approaches.
Yeah.
So I think that we should move forward to the board with both. And if the planning commission doesn't agree with the ordinance change that we suggested, that you make that clear by making a recommendation of denial of that ordinance with the alternative recommendation that David spoke about and that you guys seem to be in agreement on. And we can move both of those paths. We do alternative recommendations all the time coming through this commission to the Board of County Commissioners. So I don't think that's an issue. It just keeps it moving.
Brad, the only potential issue would be that what are you going to notice going to the board? Right? I mean, because the problem, let's just say the board agrees with planning commission. If you don't notice a version of an ordinance that says you're amending E5, you kind of tied the board's hands. They would have no ability to adopt the planning commission version of the ordinance. It wouldn't have been noticed.
So we could renotice for the board meeting, specifically for the board meeting with the new information from the planning commission to notice both.
Honestly, I really like the way, John, the idea you had to come back and get a consensus that we can go to without muddying the water. And I just think that's the way to go. And you get the public and everybody on board, staff, with what we finally decide.
If that's what the commission wants to do, how long would that take? Could it be done in another month, or?
So to what extent do we, as the county team, have a right to request this not go that way? Is there any, we feel that that's not really the right direction to take on this, so.
Well, are you demanding that the planning commission vote on this ordinance? I don't know what you're asking.
I know in a traditional application that the applicant can make that request that it be voted upon and move forward, but is that something
what we want to do is continue it. That's
Realize
what we want to do. We don't want to vote on it right now because
What-
we don't think we
What's
have
the
all the
reason?
answers.
What's the reason why you don't want to continue, Brad? Is it a timing issue? The board wants something to get to them, or?
It seems like this is a fairly simple change that's been requested by you guys, and then it is a more complex ordinance that we feel is more in line with best practices. So it's a decision that we don't want to make in this particular manner through this. It is a policy decision that was said. Which way does the board want to go with that? It really is. We will present two very clear options.
But no, I guess I understand what you're saying. We're just saying we'd like to see what the alternative option is that's going to be given to the board. And we're not going to know what that is if you take just our denial and the recommendation for alternative language.
Yeah, but I think they're saying they don't want to take an alternative to the board.
Well, no, I don't think that's what I heard them say. I thought I heard them say they want to take our recommendation of denial for this one, but here's what we did recommend approval for. Well, we don't know what we recommended approval for.
Right. But as David outlined, it doesn't seem like we're trying, the alternative solution isn't really complicated. I think procedurally, I don't know how we do that quickly, but we're talking about maybe at the most 2 or 3 sentences to the existing LDC, correct?
So then that should only
should we
take.
not continue it for 2 weeks and you come back to the next planning commission meeting with the language?
I'm surprised David hasn't already written it, to be honest. He's sitting there. I don't know what's going on, David.
I probably could, but what I can't write is what you would do in the development review manual.
No, and so would that be the full package that
I prefer to see it, personally.
Yeah, because that's, as I understood it, that's more on the enforcement side of it. We're just trying to we're trying to actually create the mechanism to implement through a very simple modification to the LDC as the alternative.
So Keith, the reason I'm struggling here is I don't know what staff is really want to do, because you're saying something somewhat different than what Brad is saying. What it sounds like what Brad is saying is he just wants to planning commission to vote this up or down.
And then make an alternative recommendation. So as I understood Brad, he's saying that obviously the ordinance presented today would be a denial, and then we're talking about voting on recommended language that would modify the other section of the code that we did not initially include in the notice.
So in order to do that, we gotta come up with the language today.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean,
No, we don't.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, we've done this, and we've done this before.
The addition to the LDC would be fairly simple, but I guess the question is, but I don't know, this is up to the planning commission, I can't tell them what to do. I don't know if they're comfortable moving that alternative forward if they don't have the language that's gonna go in the manual, the safe harbor language that's gonna go in the manual.
So the issue with that is that the development review manual is not a commission-approved document in and of itself. It's procedural, it's based on business practices and other things. So it's kind of a...
Well, what we want to see is the
mismatch.
changes to the land development code. I understand we don't approve what goes in the development manual, but in order for you to do that, there needs to be a change to the land development code, which we do review and make a recommendation about.
And that's the three sentences.
Which is the 3 sentences.
David was talking about that we can probably...
All right, well, I'd like to hear a recommendation for continuance. Do we have one of those?
Yeah, it's up to you all. I mean, if you're asking whether I'm capable of drafting the 3 sentences.
I'm starting to feel like this is trying to be stuffed down our throat, and I don't like that feeling.
So,
you know, I think we need
I
to.
am capable of drafting 3 sentences to add to E5 between now and the board meeting. I'm also capable of drafting it between now and a continued item too. So this is really up to you all what you want to do. I can't tell you what
Listen, I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm with Mr. Gray. And I'm, as a sitting planning commissioner who volunteers my time twice a month. And you know what? Since the day I've been appointed, I haven't missed one of these meetings. I have put hours and hours and hours, and I am tired of this. This is what you want to do is exactly what you wanted to do here with the development manual and the parking ordinance. In other words, you don't give a rat's behind about what the planning commission's opinion or recommendation is. We're just going to, you guys do this and we're going to go out and do our own thing. Well, I'm sure the commissioners are listening. They're hearing what the planning commission's purview is today, and I want to move to continue it for 60 days.
Do I have a second?
John, well, the 60 days, just to give them adequate time?
To give them adequate time to revise the code as per our discussion, bring back something that we can all have consensus on. I'm willing to make that 30 days or 2 weeks. I don't care.
I can second.
But
I can second.
Yeah,
you can second.
I mean, I could support them. I think 60 days is a long time. I don't think they need that long, and I think the board wants to hear something.
And I understand they want to get to an October, prior to October. I don't necessarily politically agree with it, but I'll play along with that.
So what,
So is
you want to
30 days
amend the?
acceptable?
I'll second the motion for 30 days.
The only question I have for staff is, can you get a new notice for the E5 change done
We
30
can.
days, for 30 days? Yes,
Yeah.
you can?
Yes, we can.
Okay. When somebody said 2 weeks, I wasn't sure if you could still do it in 2 weeks.
We couldn't do 2 weeks, but we could certainly do 30 days, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a
Is there a date
motion and
that's
a second.
approximate, planning commission meeting date that's
The
approximate?
next planning, the 30-day from now, approximately planning commission meeting date is August 8th, 2024, 1:30 here in Dade City.
So moved.
Brad, did you need to say something before there's a vote? You gave me the finger.
There's no camera.
For the record, can you clarify which finger?
Looking at.
We all saw it. We all saw
Looking
it.
at dates, I know we have,
That was a good one, Dave.
Right, September 17th is the budget meeting for the board. That this would kind of push us into that agenda range, which could be a problem. So But I think 30 days for here pushes us to what date for planning commission?
8/8.
8/8. Okay. So that way, I guess the 30 days is 8/8 would be the recommendation.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
You have a question from the clerk's office?
Yes.
I just wanted to confirm, it was Mr. Moody that moved for 30 days to the 8/8, and then it was you, Chairman Gray, that seconded?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that it? Denise? Can we go home?
Motion to adjourn?
That's up to you and the planning commission.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.